What's up internet? Welcome to my channel. Ken is my name, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a few tips on how you can actually improve your smartphone footage. I know for most people that are starting out on YouTube, you're basically using probably a smartphone, and that's all you got. Maybe you don't have a decent camera, a mirrorless camera, DSLR, cinema camera. Anyway, that is over the top. But if you're like me and sometimes all you have is a smartphone, I'm going to be sharing with you my 3 top tips on how you can actually improve your footage. Let's get started. Like I said, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 tips, and here they are. We're going to be talking about, first of all, before we even talk about anything else, what you have to know is the very first thing that you have to know before you even open that camera up and start shooting is you want to ask yourself, what are the specs or the specifications on your phone cameras? That is both for the front facing camera and the rear camera. Do you know the specs on those cameras? Yes, I know. Some of you could be knowing the specs on your camera, but some of you do not know the specs on your phone cameras. Anyway, for a very long time, phone manufacturers have always made it a point that your front-facing camera, or what they call the selfie camera, they had a reason why they called it a selfie camera, because it's more tailored to taking pictures and not videos. So your front-facing cameras always had lower megapixel counts compared to the rear-facing camera that has a higher pixel count. So what am I talking about? If you go into your camera settings, like me who has a Samsung, big fan of Samsung phones, and that is what I use. Yeah, for a very long time I've been using Samsung phones, and the S6, 7 and 8 actually have 12 megapixels on their rear facing camera, and they have 5 megapixels on their selfie camera. So do you know the specs on your camera? First of all, I personally prefer filming using my rear camera. Right now the footage you're watching is being filmed on a mirrorless camera, not a smartphone. So this is what I want to tell you. We're going to be talking about 3 things. That's the auto white balance, the auto focus, and the auto exposure. So those 3 things. Of course, you would go into ISO and shutter speed, but that would be a tutorial for another day. What is autofocus? I want you to look at these 2 clips, A and B. You'll immediately notice that one of them is autofocus and one of them is manual focus. If you really want nice looking footage, then you would go for manual focus. Yeah, with manual focus you have complete control over your focus. You don't want your camera to be focus hunting, you know, just like you saw in clip B. So personally I prefer manual focus. But before even I talk about manual focus and all these other things I'm talking about, do you know whether your camera has the possibility of you having full control of all the 3 things that we're talking about in this video? So please check with your phone camera settings and see if you have the possibility of having full control of your auto exposure, auto focus, and auto white balance as well. So there are instances where autofocus comes in handy, but there are also instances where autofocus is just crap. Yeah, you would really, if you really want to have control, then manual focus would be the way to go. And how you do it is very simple. If you're using a phone like my Samsung, this is an S7 Edge, though it's completely broken. I dropped it and the screen got shattered. So what you want to do is, when you go to your phone camera and probably you're shooting in auto mode, all you want to do is, when your image is there, what you do is just tap on the screen and hold it. Immediately you'll see a circle that appears showing that the autofocus and the auto exposure are now locked. So that is what you basically need. You need to lock in your exposure, autofocus. But anyway, so that's what you want to do. So you can lock in your autofocus so that, you know, you don't want your phone to focus hunt, or you can leave it in autofocus. There are scenarios where it will really work. So let's move on to the next, which is white balance, the auto white balance and the manual white balance. Now, what is white balance, you'll ask yourself. I know some of these terms are very technical, but yeah, we are all here to learn. All these are things that I've learned over the time I've been doing YouTube. So white balance is simply a color tone Some colors can be warm, some colors can be cool or cold. With the warm tones, you're basically looking at colors like orange, yellow. Those in that spectrum are usually called warm tones, and those that are cold tones are blue. When you have footage that is blue like looking, then that footage has a white balance that is cool or cold. So what you want to do is to have complete control of your white balance. I want you to look at clips A and clips B. One of those clips has something very weird happening with the colors in the clip, simply because it is in auto white balance. So what the camera sensor is basically doing is, so it's automatically sensing the colors and trying to kind of match them or process them. But when you have your white balance locked in, then definitely you're going to have a general color or a general look on all the footage that you're going to be shooting. But if you have auto white balance, then you're going to have certain footage looking different with a different color tone, maybe warm. Then in other scenarios, you're going to be having footage that is cold, that has a cold tone in its color. So you definitely don't want that to be in your videos unless you're really going for that kind of look. But personally, I wouldn't go for auto white balance. I prefer looking in my white balance so that I have a uniform color throughout my clips. With that, when you have a uniform, white balance throughout your clips, it makes the process of color grading very easy. But when you have auto white balance, the colors are changing every time you're switching from one scene to another, or from one location to another as you're filming. The white balance is going to keep on changing because you didn't lock your auto white balance. So tip number 2, lock your auto white balance. Tip number 3 is the exposure. Exposure is simply the darkness or the brightness of your video footage or picture, whatever you're trying to do with your camera. When you have your phone camera set to auto exposure, this is what you're going to have. Look at clips A and B. Clip A has auto exposure and clip B has a fixed or a locked-in exposure. With auto exposure, what is going to happen is this. If you've been filming yourself in conditions that have a lot of light, and then let's say you're moving, you're vlogging, you're moving around, and then you happen to move to a place that has little light, let's say a shadow, what is going to happen is the camera sensor is going to automatically brighten up. It's going to automatically brighten up, and you realize your shot is going to brighten up. And then when you go into a place that has too much light, it will automatically become dark. You don't want that to be in your video. That is very amateur. My winking is poor, but anyway. Yeah, we move on. So when you look in your exposure, you will not have that kind of weird, brightness and darkening of your video footage. So while filming, make sure you lock your exposure. Unless you're really in a situation where it's kind of hard to predict how light is going to change and all that. But it's very important to understand what surrounds you when you're filming. Are you moving towards a shade? Are you moving towards a place that is very bright? So all that has to be taken into account as you're vlogging, as you're filming. You don't want to be filming and all of a sudden your video becomes dark. At some point it brightens up. No, that's very amateur. So with those 3 tips, I will summarize them in this way. 1, lock auto exposure, auto white balance, and autofocus. So what you want to do is always to have those 3 parameters locked when you're filming. That will make a very big difference when you're filming your videos using your smartphone. With that said, I love you guys and stay creative.